a prime way of turning your life into a gift is to have children. And so it's a win-win. It's good for them, and it's also good for you.
Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the Senior Publishing Director at Word on Fire. Did you know that the birth rate in America is the lowest that it's ever been in recorded history? Why have families stopped having kids, and what can we do about it? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today with Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop, good to be with you as always.
Hey, Brandon. Always good to see you. How are your many kids doing?
Very well. Thank you for asking. Little Thomas, our budding Thomist, is a few months old. He's doing very well.
He's a Thomist in potency. Is that what you sent me? He's wearing a little onesie or something that says Thomist in potency.
Thomist in potency. I think I got that from the Dominican friars. I just love it. And it's like an inside joke that only 2 people in the world would get, but that makes it all the more delightful.
Well, I'm one of them, so that's good.
I wanted to ask you about the recent USCCB meeting. All the bishops of the country get together once a year, a couple times a year, but I think the big meeting is in November. You just got back from that, so tell us how it went.
I did. It was good. We meet in Baltimore every year in November, and it's the best attended of the meetings. Probably about 240 bishops probably are there. A handful of retire, but mostly the active bishops. And we meet for about 3 days. It's a workout. I must say, that meeting. It kind of goes from early morning to late at night. You're just going to meetings and gatherings and liturgies. The best part of it, all the bishops say this, is seeing each other. So especially with COVID, interrupting things, a lot of us hadn't seen that much of each other. So just getting together at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, at the breaks, that's often where the best work is done. We elected, of course, new president and vice president. So Archbishop Broglio of the military ordinary, he's a very fine guy. I've known him for a long time. And then Archbishop Laurie of Baltimore, who's, one of the most respected members of the conference, has been in every job, I think, over the years. And so those 2 very good men were elected president and vice president. And then we covered, a lot of different themes, but it was good.
Well, I wanted to talk with you about this really interesting and provocative article that recently was published in First Things magazine. It was written by Kevin DeYoung. I've admired his writing for a while. He's a Protestant pastor, I believe, in North Carolina, and also a professor of systematic theology, but he himself has 9 kids, and he wrote this article titled "The Case for Kids." Full disclosure, I have 8 kids myself, so I obviously find the arguments persuasive that kids are good. But what he starts off by noting is, he says this: the most significant thing in the world may very well be a thing that is not happening, namely men and women are not having children. He says the biblical logic has been reversed, and the barren womb has said, enough. The paradigmatic affliction of the Old Testament, namely childlessness, is now the great desire of nations. If Rachel wanted more children than life itself, our generation seems to have concluded that nothing gets in the way of life more than children. He goes through a bunch of statistics, focusing especially on this statistic known as the total fertility rate, TFR. And what sociologists have found is that the replacement rate, meaning for your population to stabilize and stay at the current levels, you need to have a TFR of 2.1 children for every woman in your civilization. And right now, almost every country on the planet is well below 2.1. Yeah. For example, he says virtually every country in Europe, including the Netherlands, United Kingdom, Germany, Belgium, hovers around 1.8. The numbers in East Asia are the worst, I think, in the world. Hong Kong, Macau, Singapore, Taiwan have a TFR around 1.0. South Korea is 0.8. The U.S. number is 1.73, which again is the lowest ever recorded. It's below the replacement rate, which means pretty soon here our population is going to decrease significantly. Here's how he interprets all those stats. He says, at no time in history have people been having fewer children. The human race seems to have grown tired of itself. What's your initial reaction to these statistics?
They're very alarming. And thoughtful people have been ringing this bell for a while. Most recently, Pope Francis said some very strong things about the situation in Italy. And of course, as Pope, he's the primate of Italy. And he was saying to the Italians, I mean, come on, because their birth rate is exceptionally low. But it's been a concern for a long time. And I think it's one of the clearest indicators of a declining civilization, of a civilization that's caught in a sort of malaise. So I think it's right for us to ring the bell and to be very concerned about it, and especially for religious people, because as you say, quoting our author, that for the Bible, it's perhaps the great sign of the covenant. When divinity and humanity come together in a rightly ordered way, one of the clearest signs is be fruitful and multiply. So what the Lord tells them is to give rise to large families. And I think that was true throughout the entire Bible. And so if the whole civilization, and especially, mind you, we might come back to this, but so many of those countries shaped by a Christian civilization, something's gone seriously wrong. When the opposite of be fruitful and multiply is happening, I think it does mean, and we could talk more about this, something's happened to that relationship between divinity and humanity, because now we have the countersign of lifelessness rather than fecundity and fertility.
He makes some interesting connections between this declining infertility and the rise of the nuns, a topic you and I have been talking about for years now.
Yeah.
I'm going to quote him. He says, the fertility gap between religious and non-religious Americans has been growing for decades, meaning religious people have more children on average than non-religious people. And now it's wider than it has ever been before. However, this gap is not yet enough to offset the defection of the nuns from the ranks of the church. But he makes the point that it could, if religious Americans increased from barely hitting the replacement rate, 2.0, 2.1, if they got up to about 2.4 children per couple, in other words, the difference between couples having 2 kids to 3 kids on average, and assuming that the family culture's faith is sticky enough that it would stick to the children they raise, it could be the difference between an America in which religion is declining and an America in which religion is back on the rise.
We could out-reproduce those who are our enemies of religion. But let's go back to that basic point. When the connection between God and humanity is attenuated, one of the signs is this decline in population. I think for a lot of reasons. To be connected to God means you're connected to an ultimate source of meaning and purpose. If you lose that, you say, well, then my own life has become rather meaningless. I put my head down and getting through it, but there's really no ultimate point. Well, then why would I bring children into the world if I'm just sharing with them a basically meaningless existence? So I get that. I mean, even at the unconscious level, if someone has severed her relationship to God, that she might say, well, what's the point of children? The second thing is you sever the relationship with God, then the world of objective value disappears. It all becomes a matter of subjective whim, right? And we've traced that problem culturally. But you say everything's a matter of subjective whim, well, then there's nothing calling me to heroic virtue. I said, I'm not just meaning to flatter you, Brandon, but when I think of heroic virtue, I often think of parents, especially parents of large families. I think it calls upon this extraordinary heroism, spiritual heroism, to say, I'm going to really dedicate my life to these kids and to the cultivation of their, flourishing. Well, if you don't believe in objective value, it's just a matter of, private satisfaction. Why would you do that? Why would you subject yourself to that kind of burden? So again, people that believe in God believe that life has an ultimate purpose, and they believe that there are moral values outside of themselves that call them beyond their own egos to heroism. So I get it. To me, it makes perfect logical sense. The less you believe in God, the less you believe in big families, and then vice versa. The more you believe in God, the more you'll believe in big families. I'll give you one anecdotal thing. But boy, it's strong on my mind. When I was a little kid, statistically, 3% of our country would have identified themselves as nuns. 97% of people in our country would have said, we have a religion. They believe in God. They probably went to church, right? Well, when I was a little guy, You go to the restaurant and table for 5, table for 7, table for 9, please. That wasn't at all unusual. Like a Sunday after church, people coming in for brunch or something. That was normal. That wouldn't have struck people as odd. There were a lot of big families. And you say, oh, because the Catholic, but not just Catholic. I mean, I think it was just much more widespread in the culture. And I don't think it's much of a stretch to say the reason for that is more and more people in those days believed in God. They had a religious sensibility. As that's been lost, I'm not surprised that be fruitful and multiply has also gone by the wayside.
We should, of course, add the caveat here that we're not saying that every family needs to have a bunch of kids, or that,
No.
parents that are unable to have kids for whatever reason are lesser. But I do want to continue on a point you're getting at, which Kevin DeYoung, the author, echoes. He says in his article that the sacrifices required in parenting are the same kinds of sacrifices required in a life of Christian discipleship. Again, doesn't mean that parents are necessarily better Christians than non-parents, but the things parenthood demands of you are very similar to the things Christ demands of you in general.
Well, yeah, because I think a parent knows in his bones that his life is not about him. And you know that a lot better than I do, Brandon, but when your kids come along, and I've seen it over and over and over again with parents. Like I know people before they're married, and they have a certain psychological makeup. They're married, that begins to change. They have kids, it really changes. It's no longer, oh, my life it's about me and my goals and things I want to achieve. It's, nope, I've shifted. My life is now about this child and the children. My life is now about these children. That kind of decentering of the ego is indeed what the spiritual life is all about, which is why there's an interesting causal relationship. Does lack of belief in God lead to fewer children? Yes. And do fewer children lead to lack of belief in God? I think it works both ways, because there's something about that move. A child comes along and it draws you out of yourself, and you don't believe anymore, if you did believe it, that values are just subjective. It's just a matter of, relativism and my personal whim. You don't believe that because there's this child in front of you who needs your love and concern. And you know that that's not a matter of subjective whim, that that's objectively valuable, right? Well, follow the logic of that. If there really are objective values, where do they come from? They don't come out of nothing. They come from their groundedness in God, the supreme value. So that makes sense to me. The causal relationship, it goes both directions. And so maybe we can start to address this problem spiritually by having more children. Not just that we start outnumbering those that don't believe in God, but the very fact of having more children will awaken a deeper sense of moral value in God.
Let's get back to the biblical vision of children.
Yeah.
DeYoung has several scripture verses. Probably the most prominent one is God's promise to Abraham in Genesis chapter 26. He says, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven. And DeYoung says, today in the lands of Abraham's offspring, that blessing strikes many people as a curse, to say that you would have that many children. What do you make of that?
Well, the biblical point stands, and all the covenants are confirmed in that way. It's like the sign of God's presence. Now, to the Christian reality, it might be a good time too, Brandon, because you had an important caution earlier. It's not Catholic teaching that married couples should simply have as many children as they possibly can. I mean, that's not Catholic teaching. That Catholic couples, using morally legitimate means, can restrict the number of kids. They can plan the number, the spacing between births and all that. So I want to be really clear about that. We're not calling for just an unrestricted, radical openness to. But if we go on so to the other extreme, where kids are seen as a burden, as a limitation. I think we did talk about this. I'm going to give now the super extreme case. When someone says, for the sake of my career, I'm going to have an abortion. I mean, I know I'm pregnant, Remember, I forget her name now. It was one of
I think it's
these
Anne Hathaway,
Hollywood.
right?
Wasn't Anne Hathaway or so? But there's another Hollywood starlet, and she gave, it was her acceptance speech at the whatever award she was getting. And it was such a pathetic moment because here she is with this stupid little award in her hand. Like, who cares? Who cares? But I wouldn't have this unless I had aborted my child. And then people are clapping for her. I mean, turn my stomach. But that's the whole problem, that children are now seen as a limitation on my ego plans, my projects, and so on. So yippee, I've got my little award, and the price I paid was killing my own child. Now that's an extreme case, obviously, but if you say, no, I'm not gonna have a lot of children because I got way too many plans, that attitude certainly needs to be questioned. Again, keeping in mind, it's legitimate to say, sure, I've got certain professional goals and certain personal goals, and we're going to space the birth of our children using morally legitimate means, all of that. So don't misunderstand me on this point. But we're pointing to a much more deep-seated problem of just an antipathy to children, almost a fear of children. I don't know, Brandon, if you've noticed this. How many horror movies have children as the scary figure? I've thought it very interesting where a child is the one that, that terrifies us. And I wonder if that speaks something in our culture of like, I'm terrified of what children will mean for my life and how they'll limit me. When in fact, I mean, the biblical witness and I think common sense and good psychology would all say, no, they bring you to life in this way that would never have happened otherwise. So that's the cultural challenge we're facing.
Well, this article we're discussing, The Case for Kids, isn't just one long Jeremiad. What I like about it is he actually concludes with a couple of proposals on how we can start to turn this picture around.
Yeah.
Here's the first one. He says, first, we must put the institution and well-being of the family at the center of the culture. A proposed rediscovery of the family is long overdue. He notes that many of the philosophical fathers of liberalism were not fathers at all. People like Spinoza, Locke, Hume, Mill, Bentham were all childless.
Descartes,
and then you have
Kant.
Descartes, the infamous Rousseau, who abandoned his 5 kids, sent them to orphanages. Kevin DeYoung says we must find a way to defend the God-given rights of the individual while also affirming that the exercise of those rights takes place chiefly within the gift of the family. Yeah. This will not just insist on vaguely defined family values. It will stand resolute in the conviction that all efforts to redefine the family as something other than a pre-political institution rooted in sex differentiation and procreation will not lead to civilizational health. What do you think about his proposal to recenter the family in our culture?
Well, yeah, and it's key to Catholic social teaching. Cardinal George used to say that all the time, that modern liberalism is predicated upon the rights of the individual. And there's a lot to be said for that. But he said, not Catholic social teaching. It's predicated upon the family, is sort of the basic social unit. What you hear all the time in Catholic social teaching is the family is the building block of society. You don't hear the individual and his rights. You hear the family is the basic building block of society. That's a sea change. That's a major difference. If you think Locke and Jefferson and the individual claiming his rights that need to be protected versus the family, which of course for us is an imago Trinitatis, right? It's an image of the Trinity. It's an ecclesiola, as John Paul II said, it's a little church. That's the foundation of our society. And it's all the reciprocity involved in the man-woman relationship, the fertility involved in giving rise to children, the love of the two giving rise to the third. I mean, that Trinitarian overtone. There's all of that. And we would say that's the foundation of a rightly ordered society. So I think that's right. The rediscovery of the primordial quality of the family. And if the family is threatened in some way, then the society is threatened. John Paul II again said that, right? As the family goes, so goes the society. And I think that's demonstrably the case.
Kevin's second proposal is for Christians and churches. He says we should place family at the center of our lives, but especially as one of the very best things God wants us to pursue, as one of the highest callings. He says Christian schools should reassess whether they are preparing students just for college or a career, or whether they're also preparing them for the family. Pastors and priests should make sure that their people know that the most direct path to changing the world starts with changing a diaper, or many diapers in my case. Too often, he says, Christian leaders lay impossible burdens on their people, insisting that they solve a whole host of social ills, forgetting to assure them that to get married, to raise children in the church, and to stay married is a life well lived. Women in particular need to know that motherhood is not a lesser calling. It's not an interruption in the real business of life or an impediment to their truly being personal. And then finally, he says, just once, I'd like to see a Christian college spotlight a stay-at-home mom in its alumni magazine. From the way many schools market themselves, you would never imagine that most of their women graduates become mothers, or that normal family life is an honorable calling. What do you think of those recommendations?
Yeah, I think he's right on all those points. You know what strikes me, Brandon, is when a young man wants to be a priest, now with the new PPF, he has to go through about 7 full years of training. Well, that's to be a spiritual father, right? That's what a priest is. And good, that's great. I'm glad we have all that training. Someone wants to be married in the church. We require, about 4 months
Maybe
of advanced
couple
warning.
Classes and a weekend.
And a couple of classes, and now off you go. And I wonder, again, I'm not saying engaged couples should go through 7 years of training, but you get my point that we don't take it as serious as we should, that marriage and family life is a vocation. And that's, of course, deeply in the teachings of Vatican II. So I think that's right. And do we see the stay-at-home mom as, God bless her, the poor pathetic thing that couldn't realize her career and now she's stuck with all these kids? But see, that's a deep, deep prejudice. And it's not to say, I know lots and lots and lots of really good Catholic women mothers who are mothers, family people, and they've had also a very rich career as a physician or a lawyer or something. It's possible. Sure it is. And I happily leave that up to the prudential judgment of responsible people. So there's not one way to do it, or this, it's not one path you have to take. Fine, if you can. But we tend to denigrate family life as an afterthought when it's the main thought. That's the main thing that you want to be concerned about. The other thing, when you were reading that quote, I remember this from an article I read years ago. The main problem with our sexual morality today is we forget the link between sex and diapers. And it's just that simple point that sex is not, just some kind of indoor pastime. It's like a sport. No, sex is meant to conduce toward children who have dirty diapers. It's all a piece that it's meant to lead to marriage and to family, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's something wise about that. If you lose the link between this lovely ecstatic experience of sex and then something like cleaning a dirty diaper, but the two of them are linked to each other.
Let's close with this question. You have a lot of young couples, a lot of married men and women listening to this podcast. If you could make the case for kids to them in a pithy way, if you could tell them why they should be happy and joyful to have children, what would you say?
Because your life becomes better the more it becomes a gift to others. And that's a prime way, not the only way. I mean, obviously I don't have children, but I have spiritual children. And but a prime way of turning your life into a gift is to have children. And so it's a win-win. It's good for them, and it's also good for you.
Well, it's time now for a question from one of our listeners. If you have something you'd like to ask Bishop Barron, send in your question at the website askbishopbarron.com. Today we have a question from Paris, France, and it's on the topic we've been discussing, namely parents and its relationship to God. So here's the question.
Hello, Bishop Barron. My name is Anirudh from Paris, France. My question to you today is about the fourth commandment and about Jesus' commandment to leave our parents. how do you reconcile the fact that Jesus asks us to honor our parents and respect them, and at the same time asks us to leave our parents to follow him? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for that. I guess by just making the distinction, leaving a parent is not necessarily to dishonor the parent. It's just the opposite. Like my mother was always very good on this. My mother, from the time we were little kids, would urge us that you're to have your own life. You're to go off on your own. You're not meant to stay here forever. You're not meant to stay. You're meant to have your own life in your own home. And so she was empowering us to live our own lives. And so I honored my mother by leaving her, right? I left home when I was 17, and I've never lived at home after that. And my mother, I know it was painful for her. I know it was when all her kids left, but I think that was a way of honoring her. So I think those two things are not mutually exclusive at all.
Well, thanks to all of you for watching and listening. A request that we haven't made in a very long time. Namely, if you like this show, if you've appreciated listening to the Word on Fire show over the years, please leave us a review on your favorite podcasting service, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Play, however you listen. It really helps get this show out to many more people. The more reviews the show has, the more often these services recommend it to others. So please, if you've liked the show, take a few seconds, leave a review. Thanks so much for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time on the Word on Fire show.